Recent developments in Crimea point to a much broader picture than isolated strikes.
When read through critical bases, radar networks, and energy hubs, serious structural vulnerabilities in the region's defensive architecture become visible. Despite Russia deploying stronger assets into the field, the resulting picture did not produce the expected balance. In this video, we will analyze, step by step, the fracture points in Crimea and how the signals coming from Moscow align with this broader pattern. First, let's focus on Crimea itself. Then we'll quickly assess the overall picture. On some nights along Crimea's western coast, the lights did not go out. There was light, but no flow. Radars were turning, bases were in place, and units appeared ready on paper. But the element that keeps them operational, energy, was cut twice at the same point. This is not a story about an explosion. It is a story about a broken habit. By early January, the picture had become clear. In the final quarter of 2025, the main artery supplying the western part of the peninsula was targeted twice. The 330 kV Zahidnokrimsk substation. Such a facility is not the eyes of a military system. It is its heart. If the heart is functioning, units move and radars rotate. When the heart falters, even the most expensive systems remain on display. Being able to reach this type of infrastructure in two separate time windows suggests not so much that the defences were pierced, but that the direction the defences were focused on proved ineffective. Facilities of this kind are located behind the front line and are usually covered by layered air defence, patrols and early warning. If they could be reached twice, the route used was most likely chosen through corridors the defence did not consider critical. What was affected was not just a substation. Think of it in everyday terms. You have a generator, but the pump feeding it is not working. On paper, there is a solution. On the ground, there is no flow. This node, which feeds the Yevpatoria and Saki line in western Crimea, is also the energy backbone of nearby military facilities. Because of its central location in Crimea, it can quite literally be described as a heart. Ukraine's objective appears to have been to disable this hub. In the second half of January, the target this time was not a rear area substation, but one of the main fuel gateways facing the Black Sea, the large oil terminal on the Taman Peninsula. Such facilities are less visible than a tank at the front, but they set the tempo of a war. If fuel flows, there is movement. If fuel is disrupted, even the strongest units stall in place. Being able to reach this site creates a quieter but more widespread impact than the fall of a single frontline position. Because fuel equals mobility. When mobility drops, the risks taken at the front increase. That radar stations in Crimea were also affected. The same night does not look coincidental. The energy line is put under pressure, and now the eyes are being weakened. Radar is the eye of a defense system. When the eye weakens, the defense may not go blind, but it sees later. When it sees later, its reaction is delayed. When reactions are delayed, the door is opened for the next move. The sequence here is telling. First, the heart is strained, then the eyes are blurred. This is a pattern aimed less at individual targets than at the system's reflexes. This pressure is not confined to the Crimea axis. Within the same wave, rear area depots, observation posts, and ammunition lines are also being strained. This is not a "we hit one place and it's over" logic. It is about forcing the opposing side to manage multiple problems at once. Energy is disrupted, fuel lines are under stress, radars are under pressure. Taken individually, each looks manageable. Taken together, the tempo of the system drops. At this point, a small but telling move began on the ground. Some specialized units used at the front were pulled back and redeployed to a loudly announced withdrawal. It was a quiet shift in priorities. Pulling units that are used in the most difficult moments at the front back to rear areas is not a show of strength. It is a reflex. If everything were truly going well at the front, no one would pull their most experienced elements back to stand guard around substations, radar sites, and bases. Let me clarify this detail. because simply saying units were redeployed misses the core message. Those pulled from the front and shifted to Crimea are not ordinary garrison troops. There are two distinct profiles involved, and neither was chosen by coincidence. One of them is the Irish group within the structure, known as Espagnola. This is not a conventional regular army battalion. It is a more flexible and harder core element used at the front specifically for urban combat, sabotage, and close contact operations. Under normal conditions, groups like this do not stand guard in rear areas. These are the types that go in first when a position is to be taken. Pulling such a group back from the front and deploying it around facilities in Crimea indicates that the threat is no longer seen as a distant possibility, but as something pressing directly at the door. The other is the team known as Vial 8, drawn from the 106th Airborne Division. In Russian military doctrine, airborne units are used as gap pluggers in moments of crisis. In other words, if a line is about to collapse at the front, or if a sudden countermove is required, these are among the fastest and best trained elements to be deployed. Their role is normally not to guard rear areas, but to stabilize the balance at critical moments on the front. Redeploying such units to Crimea suggests that some sectors at the front are being deliberately left to less experienced elements. The reason these two groups were moved to Crimea is not a vague notion of increasing general security. In recent weeks, rear area energy nodes, radar sites, and logistical facilities have come under pressure. Such targets are struck in windows where conventional air defense is least effective. Drones come in low, quietly, sometimes waiting for hours for the right moment. Against this, simply placing missiles on towers is not enough. What is needed are personnel who constantly scan the area, use thermal imaging, react quickly, and have field-level reflexes. These groups exist precisely for that purpose. In other words, the choice being made here says, our fixed defensive setup is not sufficient, so we are pulling battle-hardened personnel from the front and placing them in the rear. This is not a show of strength, it is an admission of vulnerability, because when elite elements are pulled back from the front, the tempo at the front drops. For Ukraine, the withdrawal of elite units from the immediate line of contact naturally translates into an advantage. Now we move to the central assessment. Once the rear areas in Crimea were put under strain and elite units were drawn back from the front, it was clear that this pressure would not go unanswered. Moves of this kind rarely remain one-sided on the battlefield. When one side stresses the system from the rear, the other typically attempts a harsher response from the front. Indeed, within days, a completely different scale was introduced on the battlefield. The sky filled simultaneously with hundreds of targets. The package launched into the air was above the usual norm, both in numbers and in composition. In a single night, more than 500 aerial vehicles were deployed. This included ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, hundreds of attack drones, and hypersonic systems that are rarely used together against ground targets. In particular, the inclusion of 4 Zircon-type hypersonic missiles in the same attack wave suggested a broader objective than simply hitting targets. It pointed to an attempt to probe and stress the defense. Missiles of this class, because of their speed and flight profiles, are among the most challenging categories for conventional air defense. The logic of this composite attack package is straightforward: to overwhelm the defense not from a single direction, but simultaneously from different speeds and altitudes. The slow but dense drone wave distracts radars and operators. The ballistic and hypersonic munitions that follow exploit the resulting complexity to search for gaps. But in this case, the chain did not break. Of the 521 targets detected in the air, the majority were neutralized. Approximately 450 were either directly intercepted or rendered ineffective. This figure did not consist of drones alone. A significant portion of the ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as all detected Zircon hypersonic missiles, were among those intercepted. Bringing down targets of such speed and energy is not something that can be dismissed as a lucky hit. It requires early detection, a shared radar picture, and interceptors being cued at the correct moment. Think of it in everyday terms. Catching a slow-moving ball is not the same reflex as catching a stone thrown at full speed. In the latter case, the margin for reaction is almost non-existent. The focus of this strike was less on military positions and more on the lifelines of cities. Pressure directed at heating and energy infrastructure in the middle of winter does not only create technical damage, it tests the resilience of urban life. Electricity and heat form the backbone of a city's functioning. When that backbone is strained, resilience behind the front line is also tested. Yet the large-scale rupture that might have been expected did not materialize. The system was shaken, some lines went offline, but the overall structure remained standing. This suggests that the attempt to overwhelm the system with high-tech saturation did not produce the level of results anticipated. At this point, the bigger picture becomes clear. On one side, energy nodes, radar sites, and logistical facilities are being put under pressure. On the other, the response seeks to saturate the sky. In other words, both sides are targeting not the front line itself, but the resilience of the system as a whole. Who will remain standing longer? Who will recover their reflexes faster? Who will avoid losing defensive rhythm? This is where the real contest is unfolding. The critical question now is this: if such a complex and demanding attack wave could be contained, will the opposing side attempt to scale it up further, or will it change methods altogether? Because when a move fails to produce the desired effect, the tendency on the battlefield is usually not to repeat the same action with slightly more force, but to alter the shape of the game. We have examined the overall framework under these headings. The situation on the ground is not static. We will closely follow how these dynamics evolve in the period ahead. For continued analysis, you can subscribe to the channel and enable notifications to stay up to date with new videos. See you in the next analysis.